Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Asher Agency, a full-service marketing agency with offices in Indiana, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. For nearly 50 years, Asher has helped our clients tell their stories, reach customers and prospects, and stand out from the crowd. To learn more about how we can help your company, visit asheragency.com or contact us at hello@asheragency.com. My guest is Katie Beauchamp. Katie, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. You kind of got it there.
I got your last name close to right?
Beauchamp, yes.
Okay. No disrespect to your husband, but I wish you were still Katie Jones because that's a lot easier.
It was a little easier. We'll blame him for that.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us despite me botching your last name. How's the new gig going?
It is going great. It's such a great, supportive company, and I have just loved jumping in there and getting to know everyone, getting to know a brand new industry.
Yeah.
And it's been fabulous.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk more about that in just a few minutes, but I wanted to rewind the tape, so to speak, and talk a little bit about your career path and talk about how in the world you've ended up in banking, because that's not where you started based on what I know about your career. So tell me a little bit about when you started thinking about careers. What were you thinking? And when did you pivot and why? So start wherever the beginning is for you. For some people, that's high school. For some, it's college. But when did you first start thinking about this stuff, and where did that take you?
Yeah, it was kind of high school for me. It started with an internship. My senior year, I was with Visit Wabash County over in Wabash, Indiana. And I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to go into radiology. I thought maybe business, maybe marketing.
Yeah.
And one of our mentors at the high school that was kind of leading this internship program, her name's Carrie Johnson. She was like, I have a place that would be so good for you. And it was Visit Wabash County.
Okay.
Started there as a marketing intern, and man, I loved it. And not just the marketing aspect of it, but the community involvement part, the events, knowing everyone on the street, just sitting there and talking to everyone. I ended up staying there, getting hired on for the summer. Majority of my college, I worked there. Went to IUK, Indiana University, Kokomo. Also did Visit Wabash County. So I went from, I think, marketing intern to marketing assistant to eventually creative lead there.
Okay. So marketing wasn't on your radar at all?
No.
And high school, was it a teacher?
Yeah.
Kind of said, this is something I think you'd be good at.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what that person saw in you that made them connect those dots?
I had never taken a marketing class in high school or anything. I had taken a few business development classes in high school, and I don't know if she just saw I love to talk to people. I was pretty creative in high school. I loved being involved in the community. I was involved in so many activities at high school. So I wonder if she maybe just saw that, thought I would click there, and I sure did.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, and I've said this on this podcast dozens of times, but sometimes it takes someone who isn't you to see potential in you that maybe you don't realize you have, especially when you're young.
Oh, yeah.
For me, careers were an absolute mystery until I was in one, and sometimes they still are. So that's great that you had that sort of mentor that pointed you in the right direction. So you're at Visit Wabash County. I'm cheating. I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile.
No, you're fine.
For about 4 years altogether? Okay. All right. And then where do you go from there, and why do you make a change?
Yeah. So it was a nonprofit organization, and unfortunately, there is that next step you have to take, and it does suck sometimes, and you love where you're at, and you love the people you're with, but sometimes your career is just ready for that next step. And so for that for me was Gebhardt Holdings. I actually had a mentor at the time, Carrie Vineyard, and she was the chief of marketing there. And her and I just really clicked as well. And she knew I was really ready for that next step in my career. And so I went there as a visual communication specialist. And I learned so much there, going from a nonprofit world to the corporate world. Huge change.
Well, and Carrie, I want to give Carrie a shout out because while she's never been on the podcast, she's the reason you and I met. And also we've had some guests from Grace College, and she was my introduction there now that she's there. So I probably should invite her on to
She would be an amazing guest.
So Gebhardt Holdings, for those who are unfamiliar with it, tell me what that organization does, because it's really a collection of organizations, right? How would you describe that organization?
Yeah, it's a holdings company of a bunch of different companies that are in a lot of different industries. So there is Wabash Trucking, which is in the trucking logistics industry. There's Metal Source in the metal recycling industry. They have a restaurant, so you're in the food and beverage industry. What am I missing? The Wabash Steel Supply. So they hit a lot of different industries, but Gebhardt Holdings was like the holdings company over that.
Okay.
So I was kind of there and doing the marketing for 7 different companies at one point.
So you're simultaneously doing marketing for the restaurant and for metal recycling and for everything else. So how do you manage that? How do you kind of turn your brain in those different directions?
Yeah. The biggest thing, since I've worked in so many different industries in such a short amount of time, honestly, I just love to dive in and talk to absolutely anyone I can talk to that's working there, whether it's the waitress, the factory worker, like anything, just so I can get to know the business inside and out, so I know easily what to market, who to market to, and the people there are always, so far, have been super accepting, super supportive, want to sit and talk about their job. And I'm like, tell me everything I need to know, you know?
Well, it's, I've always said that organizations where marketing happens in isolation within the marketing department, it's usually not really good. Where you really shine is when you get the opportunity to talk to the people who are on the front lines and ideally customers too, to get an understanding of what is the story. Because otherwise you're going to have to make something up and it's probably not going to be accurate. So that access is great. And you were there, again, I'm cheating looking at my notes.
Fine.
You were there for about 3 years, a little over 3 years? Okay, so why did you make a change? And let's pivot into what you're doing now. Why did you make a change and where did that lead you?
Yeah, and obviously with that many industries, you can get a little overloaded.
Oh, sure.
And so I was kind of in the phase of trying to manage that. I was getting married. Life is just changing. And so I'm kind of just like ready to change with it with my career. I was kind of getting burnt out a little bit, but, that comes with grinding,
Yeah, for sure.
So this position was with Crossroads Bank, and it was a community bank, which that's kind of the thing that's really stuck with me is I love marketing, but the thing that really drives me is benefiting the community. And in that position at Gebhardt Holdings, I got to do a lot of events that benefited the community. So that is huge for me. And having like a purpose, not just marketing for this company, but like, why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? So Crossroads really stuck out to me. And I went and did an interview there and was ready for the change.
The rest is history. Okay. So for someone who's not familiar with Crossroads Bank, how do you describe it? It's based in Wabash, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how is it different from big banks and other community banks?
Yes, that's such a good question because there is a huge difference. This is a community bank, which there's a lot of regulations and things you have to do to meet the terms community bank. We have places our main branch is in Wabash, but there's Peru, North Manchester, Kosciuszko County, we have some in there, Whitley County, and which is another thing where I didn't want to jump to such a small business, and this still was branched out, but community bank means that we're putting dollars back into the community, especially to help low-income families. We're going to be there during customer service calls. We're going to be a phone call away. You have a problem, we're going to fix your problem right away. You can come right into the bank, talk to us. You can pick up the phone, call us. You're going to be talking to a person. Well, and I had a recent experience. I'm sure this is familiar to most of us who do some banking with big banks. I just got in that cycle of press 6 for this, press 4 for that. And I think I'm still pressing buttons because I never got where I wanted to go. So it's nice to be able to have that connection and that ability to get your problem solved. So you were brand new to this banking thing. So I want to say, how did you learn, but how are you learning the industry? What are you doing to figure out what marketing means in the banking world and how you're going to execute that? So many trainings. I feel like it never ends. But you're always learning, right? I had to really jump into compliance because, starting it, I never even thought about compliance. And then when you're in it, you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of rules. So always being, and there's changes all the time for bank law and things like that. So it's always staying up to date on the current rules, current regulations for banking. We have an amazing compliance department that if I don't know what's going on or I'm nervous about making a post or doing something, I just send it to them and I'm like, tell me what I did wrong. Help me, you know? And they're super great about that. And the good thing is they know I don't have a banking background, and I was fully transparent about that. But when I went into the steel industry, I knew nothing about steel. But I'm willing to learn and jump in and figure it out. And so I've been doing trainings with the IBA, so the Indiana Banking Association, going to a bunch of forums for those, kind of leaning on some other bank marketers for community banks. And it's really been great. I mean, and just the community aspect of it and being able to still support our local communities is really what pushes me too.
Yeah, well, that's great. So let me ask you a question about the whole compliance aspect. One of the things that's on my mind is, social media being such a driver of customer service and such a driver of new customer acquisition. How do you make social work, because social moves really fast in an environment that's heavily regulated, and you have to make sure you're not sending out information that's going to get you in trouble. How are you balancing that?
That has been pretty hard too. I'm always nervous. I'm like, is this...
Which is probably a good thing.
Yes.
Because the minute you stop being nervous is when you get in trouble.
I know. I don't want to get too comfortable, you know?
Yeah.
I kind of play it better safe than sorry. I'm like, extra regulation on this. I'll take, if it's just a simple post, I'm like staring at this thing forever. Probably too long amount of time.
Do you have to get approval on all posts, or is there some give and take where it's like, these posts are okay, but if it's about this, it has to go through a process? How does that work?
If we have like a large campaign we're doing, I will definitely run that past. I am underneath our Chief Administration Officer, Emily Boardman, so I'll be like bouncing things off of her all the time. If it's a campaign for lending or a specific part of the bank, I'll bounce it off of that officer. And normally, if we are doing a campaign, I'm looping in the compliance officer throughout the whole conversation. So you've got some general clearance on the campaign, so you know anything within that is going to be safe. But if it has a percentage sign in the copy, you're probably going to want to send it to compliance. I try to avoid the percentage sign.
For sure. Well, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about the team you're working with. You mentioned the person you report to. Are you the only marketing person? Okay, for those who are listening to this,
I am nodding my head.
And she has a look of wonder in her eyes because she's a department of one. So you're working closely with compliance, you're working closely with others, but in terms of getting the work done, it's you doing all that execution? Wow. Okay, so you're writing, you're designing, you're doing social media, you're doing video?
Videography.
Wow, you're doing media relations, I'm sure.
The list never ends.
Okay.
Since Visit Wabash County, my boss there was Christine Floor. You might know her. She taught me to have, this might be old school, but a written planner. And I live by this thing. Okay. It is like my holy grail.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I have always had a planner. I have one for every year, and I've kept them all. So like next year, I'll be able to go back through when I make my new planner. But if I didn't have that, I think I would probably be crying every day. I have everything for every day out for the rest of the year. And as things come up, they go on there. There's a rainy day list, that never happens. And I would die without that.
Well, that's great to kind of get the work done. And I'll tell you that my first job in marketing, where marketing or some form of it was in my title, was with a healthcare system with Parkview. And it was one of the community hospitals. It was the Whitley County Community Hospital. And I was doing, I won't say everything because there were other people on the team, but I was doing a lot. I was designing, I was writing, I was doing media relations. I'm old enough that there really was no social media, so that wasn't part of the job. But it was basically everything you think of as content development and then some in that job. And it was one of the best experiences. Number one, because I had a really great boss. Shout out to Karen Manis. But also because I learned so much. I learned about different tactics. I learned what I was good at and wasn't good at. And there was was a lot more in the latter column than the former, and learned a lot about healthcare like you as an entity where I had no previous experience. But by trying to cover all that ground, you just inevitably learn a lot. So I would assume your experience is similar.
Oh, yes, for sure. And when I was at Gebhardt Holdings, I was on more of the creative side of marketing. So I was the visual communication specialist, just doing designing. I did do social media, photography, videography. And so when you go to a one-man team, of course it is a little bit died down, and you have to figure out what you want to focus on, what's the most important. Even though I'm good at designing, I'm good at all the creative side, I have to pick up that kind of more strategic, analytical side, because that is very important as well, and I can't just do what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, well, and if your career evolves like many people I know, including to some degree myself, it's kind of hard to let the more tactical stuff go because you're comfortable with it, you know how to do it. But if you need to operate at the 20,000-foot level and focus on strategy, you have to let something go. And sometimes that more tactical day-to-day stuff is what gives. So
even if it causes a tear.
I mean, all of us get, we get comfortable with doing certain types of work, and it's scary to take on bigger responsibilities, but that's where the good stuff happens.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah. So what are some of the, obviously you've been learning a lot, but what are some of the things that you're focused on in the near term, those big items at the top of your to-do list that maybe they're exciting, maybe they're keeping you up at night, maybe it's a combination of those things. What are you focused on over the next 6 months or so?
Yeah. So at Crossroads, obviously compliance keeps me up at night. All my ideas that come floating in, I'm like, okay, is that compliant? Or how did we get this compliant? But with Crossroads Bank, one thing that they hadn't been super involved in before I went there was kind of their digital presence. Whether that be, they did have social media, but obviously enhancing that, but in more ways of like email marketing. Right now there's mailers and things like that, which obviously are great as well. But email marketing is such a more cost-effective way as well. And just kind of figuring out what our target, how to reach our target, especially when I'm learning who our target is.
For sure.
And having just a little bit more of a digital presence is what I'm really focusing on now.
Yeah, well, and we're at a point, and you know this probably even better than I do, because you're living it every day, is we're at a point where in smaller community banks, you have customers who their digital isn't their first source of information. So you still have to do some of the things that might seem antiquated to some marketers, but they're very important in the world where you're working. But then you have the need and the imperative to acquire younger customers and meet them where they are, which isn't in the newspaper and it's not in their mailbox, their physical mailbox. It's in the email inbox. It's on social media. So we're kind of at a point where you have to be good at all of that.
Yes, exactly. Especially in the new areas that we're kind of going into, like one of our newest branches is in Warsaw. And I mean, Grace College is over there, right? And so you have a lot of younger demographics. So it's like, how do we even just start in Warsaw? Like, how do you reach this younger demographic? And it's just having a digital presence more.
Yeah. So how are you prioritizing all these different needs? Because not only you're just one person, you've got all these different tactics, you've got all these different audiences, and I'm sure you have a laundry list of strategies and goals. How are you prioritizing this? Is it the written planner, or is there something more that you're doing to keep everything in line?
Yeah, obviously I want to do it all. You know, I'm ready to like overload myself and go home crying at the end of the day. But I've learned that that's not the way to do it. And even though I am a one-man marketing team, I do have such a supportive team around me that obviously is willing to jump in at any events or anything too. But my chief administration officer, Emily Boardman, we just recently sat down and we're like thinking of this marketing strategy. Okay, what's important? What aligns with our entire company strategy, our plan? What's not just important to me, like what's important to our board, what's important to our C-suite, you know? And that has kind of driven like what's going to be on my top priority. Even if I think like social media is going to be the best, you know, it's what do we collectively think is our strategic goal here? Yeah, well, I'm really glad to hear that, because it really is leadership's job to set that template and then allow you to be creative in how you execute.
but I'm glad to hear that it's not your responsibility to come up with the top marketing strategies.
Yes. I did that with Emily, and it's been super great. And it does offer so much guidance, and then they totally trust me to be like, okay, so how do we get there?
Yeah, well, that's great. All right, well, I want to pivot to a few quicker hit questions. Your answers don't have to be quick hit. I call this the quick hit part of the podcast, but
I talk a lot, so we'll see.
Sometimes I'm the problem and I ramble on and on, so it's not just you. So the first question has to do with building a successful and fulfilling career. You've done a lot of great things at a very young age. You've moved to industries where you had no prior experience. You've taken a leap where you were comfortable, but you decided to do something different. What have you learned in that might be useful for other people to hear in terms of your best career advice? How do you build a successful and fulfilling career?
You know, there's two things that come to mind are definitely separating work and your life. When I got out of college, even when I was in college, I was just so involved in my work, like events, especially in marketing. You know, you're always doing something. You always have to be turned on, whether you might see someone out and about or it's social media or whatever it is. And especially getting married last year, I've got a life to share now. I can't just be working at home in the evening, and nor do I need to be. And so figuring out that balance has really helped me so much, which took a long time and kind of hard to admit too. And figuring out that, you know, they aren't expecting me to go home and put in all the hours. I'm just diving too deep into it,
Well, and a lot of times it is self-imposed, especially when you are learning a new industry. And the truth is, as you mentioned, in marketing, it never stops. You can always do something else, but that's precisely why we need to have the discipline to stop, to say, okay, I could go on forever, but the day is over unless a real emergency comes up, because I need to recharge and be ready to, bring a fresh set of eyes to this tomorrow. There's a book that I was reading recently that was talking about, when do people have their best ideas? And it's always when they're not working. The cliches are in the shower, when they're driving, all these other things. So, if you're always working, if the laptop's always open, you're probably going to be down at the very tactical level and not have those big ideas.
Every time I get that, I'll be laying in bed and I'll get the good idea and I'm like, I got to email that to myself.
So was that, when you were single, was that easier for you to make that switch, or is it easier now that you have someone else in your life?
Honestly, it's easier that I have someone in my life because when you are alone, you're kind of just like trying to fill your time, whether it be volunteer work or work in general. Now that I have my husband, Cameron, he'll be brutally honest with me. He'll be like, you are not home, you're doing too many things during the week. You're always talking about work. You're bringing work home with you. And I want him to hold me accountable of that, because I don't want him to come home from work and just be ranting and mad the whole night, you know? And so I'm so glad that we have that respect for each other to be like, hey, listen, you're home from work, like be home from work. Well, and I think it's great that you have that transparency and that good communication. And my wife has to remind me of this from time to time. She's like, what I'm saying is, I want to spend time with you, and that's a good thing. So it's like, oh, okay, all right, maybe I should turn it off and focus on this. You're not tired of me yet.
Well, good. Well, good.
And the other thing I was thinking too was, it's just all about relationships too. I mean, so far the careers that I've had whether you like it or not, it's who you know, honestly.
100%.
Especially in a smaller community, which even in a larger community too, I'm sure it's the same way, but it's really all about who you know and forming those relationships.
I think it's true everywhere. It's a little bit more palpable in smaller communities, and I count Fort Wayne in that, right? Fort Wayne, I don't think there's 6 degrees of separation. I think there's about 2 degrees of separation. And I always say that anything good that's ever happened to me is not because of me. And I get to bring something to the table, but it's because of a relationship. I mean, even the podcast is the result. Those of you who are listening and not watching, I'm pointing at producer Nick. But this would have never happened if not for him, because he's the brains of the operation. He does all the audio engineering. He makes sure I just show up and talk. And we met when he was in a class that I taught. So no Nick, no podcast, right? So, similar type of thing. And I think that's really important advice for people to hear. You have to bring skills, knowledge, and talent to the table, but those things only matter to the degree that you can connect them to other people. If you can't, someone with less skills, knowledge, and talent is going to get more opportunities.
And I kind of feel like then it benefits you in your career anyways. Like knowing this connection, or at least a little bit of this connection before you go to the career, they already know that you're going to give it 110% and bring it to the table, just a bare minimum of what they know of you.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just starts the relationship off great anyways. You know?
Well, and I think you're living proof of the fact that people will take a chance on someone with whom they have a relationship and they trust, even if they don't have industry experience. A lot of young people will say to me, well, how do you get a job when every job requires experience? And there's really, it all comes back to build relationships, right? Whether that's through volunteer work where you show people what you're capable of, or just through networking where you meet people and they say, okay, well, Katie's never worked for a bank, but I know her. It looks like she's done good work elsewhere. That'll probably translate here. You're probably in a better position than someone who has a little banking experience but no relationship.
Yeah.
All right. Second quick hit question. What is something about the work you do that is maybe misunderstood? And that could be banking. It could be the marketing you do at the bank. Something that is either untrue and you want to debunk the myth, or something that is not appreciated well enough and you want to kind of amp it up.
Yeah, I feel like banking can definitely fall into this category for sure. Jumping in, you're like, oh, it's banking. I've had people ask me, are you excited about that? Do you like being in that? And I'm like, it's kind of how you interpret it. I mean, so far, what I've looked at it, and maybe my compliance officer is hating me right now, but she's been great to work with. As long as I'm compliant, we can brainstorm and have these great ideas and be innovative and be that different community bank and exciting, and especially because I love that community take on it. Do these testimonials we've been doing with people who are customers of ours, and just pushing what those relationships look like out there. So it doesn't have to be boring. So I guess the banking industry in general, bankers aren't boring.
Okay. All right. That's a nice pithy soundbite. That's very, very tweetable or Xable or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Well, and, I think it's all what you make it, right? One of the industries that I've done a little work with is insurance. And when they're trying to recruit new hires, they're like, hey, you've probably never had a dream job of working in insurance, but, what we do enables people to focus on their work and not worry about what'll happen if. And I think it's true to community bank too. It's one of the things that enables people starting businesses. It enables people buying a new home. It enables people to send their kids to school.
There's such a purpose.
And it doesn't get much better than that if you really dig a level deeper. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So bankers aren't boring.
Bankers aren't boring.
That's our takeaway. All right. Last quick hit question. There's a lot of tools that marketers use to get the job done. You already mentioned one, so maybe this is your answer, but feel free to come up with another one. What's something you use that helps you, especially as someone who's a team of one trying to do a million different things? What's something you use that helps you be more efficient or more effective that you think is worth a mention?
Yeah, obviously having some form of list to prioritize what you need to do, especially if you're a one-man team, small business or something, trying to figure all your things out, having something to lay out everything you need to do and prioritize it is obviously top thing. I know you said that some people have mentioned this before, but Canva, I think, is so underrated for people.
Yeah.
It is such a good tool and if you don't know what Canva is, it's just kind of a design software. But it is so easy I love that it's so accessible for smaller businesses. Maybe a one-man marketing team where I have skills in Adobe. I can totally whip up anything in Adobe, InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, but Canva, especially with their new AI capabilities, has made my job so much easier and so much quicker and efficient.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of small businesses don't even know it's there or utilize it enough.
Well, I think they're used to design programs being scary and borderline impossible to learn, right? And that, to me, I'm a huge Canva fan. Sorry, Azure designers who use the Adobe suite.
Like Adobe.
But and there's merit to that, right? But I'm amazed every time. I don't use Canva often, but when I do, I'm like, this solved a very specific problem because there was either the inability to do it well or a huge need to learn these complex programs and nothing in between.
Yeah.
And then Canva comes along and it's like, oh, problem solved.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can get much higher quality, more complex designs out of more complex programs. But for those of us who aren't full-time designers, it's pretty great.
Yeah, I think it's such a good asset for anyone to be able to use. There's also like training programs on there on how to use it.
Yeah.
So I think it's super beneficial. And when I'm working with anyone in the community, like a small business or a boutique or something, I'm like, do you have Canva? Like, you could easily use this.
Well, the other thing is the free version is really good.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times when there's that freemium model, it's like the free version is crap and it's just enough to show you what the potential is, but you can't get very far. But with I'm very cheap, so I use free Canva, but it gets the job done and does it pretty well. And yeah, there's more you can do with the paid version, but the free version's pretty good.
Yeah, and I still love Adobe, but Canva is just killing it.
Well, this episode was not sponsored by Canva. But if anyone out there from Canva would like to sponsor the Azure Marketing Podcast, let us know. Well, Kitty, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. Sounds like you're doing an amazing job and doing a lot, and really appreciate you telling us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Azure Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great guest whose name I will hopefully pronounce correctly, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.